Yesterday, our emergency plan to help Canadians was passed by Parliament, with even more generous measures that will help even more Canadians. We're talking about $107 billion for workers, families, and businesses that are going through tough times because of COVID-19. We are now introducing a single benefit, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, to help workers who have lost their income because of the pandemic. Whether you are eligible for EI or not, that benefit is there to help you. People will receive $2,000 from the federal government every month for the next 4 months. We will also be launching an online portal as soon as possible so that people can apply quickly, receive money in the next 10 days.
Our plan to help Canadians save jobs and support our economy was adopted by Parliament. With more generous measures to help even more Canadians, we're now talking about $107 billion to support people and businesses. We launched the new Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which will provide $2,000 a month for up to 4 months to people who are not getting paid as a result of COVID-19. This will replace the 2 benefits we announced last week to make it even simpler for you to get help. An application portal will launch as quickly as possible, and people should start receiving money within 14 days of applying. As part of this plan, we'll also be boosting the Canada Child Benefit for families in May. Parents already know how much the CCB helps with the cost of raising kids. By increasing the CCB, we'll put even more money in the pockets of families to help them navigate these uncertain times. We'll also be supplementing the GST credit, which is sent to low-income Canadians every few months. And for people who are still paying off their student loans, we're putting a 6-month interest-free moratorium on their Canada student loans. You can find more information on what else we're doing and how to access your benefits at canada.ca. I'm sorry to say there appears to be a text scam going around on the new emergency response benefit. I want to remind everyone that the government's website is the best place to find reliable information on everything we're doing.
You can consult the site canada.ca to receive more information about what our government is doing to counter COVID-19 and on the way to have access to benefits. Unfortunately, some people have received a text message that seemed to come from the government with respect to the new emergency benefit. This is a scam. I want to remind you that the government website is the best place to find reliable information about what we're doing. It's clear that the pandemic is placing a lot of pressure on our healthcare system, on employment insurance, and particularly the government apparatus. But know that we're doing everything we can to shorten the deadlines. I know that bills are piling up and pressure is mounting, and that concerns many, many families, rightly so. But we are working as quickly as possible to put money into your pockets. We also know that people abroad are still having trouble finding flights to come back home, and we continue to work with airlines in order to bring people home. Yesterday, Air Transat announced 2 other flights leaving from El Salvador and Guatemala for Montreal. At the same time, our government is in close contact with our international partners who are also facing this crisis. We're looking what has worked for them, and we're trying to see whether we can take inspiration from their success.
I spoke to G20 leaders. One thing is clear. We can only overcome COVID-19 if we take action together as a global community. So we're going to do whatever it takes. That means making sure the World Health Organization and our public health agencies have the resources they need. It means working together to develop a vaccine, identify treatments, and increase testing. We're also expanding manufacturing capacity for critical medical equipment and working to keep the supply chains moving to get that equipment to the people who need it. Our government is helping companies in Canada retool their manufacturing facilities to produce the things we all need. On the economy, the G20 has also made significant investments to help people and businesses get through this challenging time. And we're going to be working closely together to coordinate our efforts to protect the global economy. COVID-19 is a global crisis and demands a global response. Now, more than ever, we must work with our allies to protect people and the economy. And on that note, I announced this morning that I'm appointing Kirsten Hillman as our new ambassador to the United States. Ambassador Hillman is a gifted and brilliant diplomat. She was instrumental in securing a good deal for Canada and for Canadians during NAFTA negotiations. Most recently, Ambassador Hillman played a key role as we worked with our southern neighbors to temporarily close the border while keeping trade flowing. As we fight COVID-19, we must protect the supply chains on which we depend for things like fresh vegetables, medicine, and supplies for our healthcare systems. Our ports, railways, and trucks are vital to bringing in the things we need, and I want to thank all the workers who are keeping our country moving. Every day, our government looks at what we need to do better to help you and keep you safe from this evolving crisis. So in response to the fact that too many travelers are still not self-isolating upon returning to Canada, we're taking greater action. I've been very clear on this. The premiers, Dr. Tam, and public health officials have all been very clear on this. If you've just returned from abroad, you have to go home and stay home for 14 days. But some people have not been taking this seriously. They're stopping by the grocery store on their way home from the airport. They're getting together with friends after being away for March break. This kind of conduct is not just disappointing, it's dangerous. So now, a 14-day quarantine will be mandatory for all Canadians returning home from abroad. We are implementing the Quarantine Act to keep all Canadians safe. If you do not comply with these instructions, you could face serious fines and even prison time. C'est absolument
It is absolutely essential that all travelers go into a 14-day quarantine when they come back from travel. This is a message we've been repeating, but some people don't seem to be taking these recommendations seriously. That is not only disappointing, it's dangerous. Therefore, we are making quarantine mandatory by invoking the Quarantine Act. If you refuse to follow the instructions, you may receive a stiff penalty or even be sent to prison. We all have a role to play in order to stop the spread of the virus. What we're asking you is not difficult. Stay home, wash your hands, keep a proper distance from others, and call your friends rather than going to see them. And especially if you're coming back from abroad, under no circumstances can you leave your home for 14 days. We also all want to see life go back to normal as soon as possible. But for now, everyone has to do their share. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va maintenant passer aux questions des journalistes par téléphone. Modérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. La première question nous vient de Michel Lamarche, TVA Nouvelle. À vous la parole.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to hear from you. Can you hear me? I want to hear from you about the 16 tons of equipment that has been sent in February from China. Can you explain that decision? Because it seems that in many provinces they are lacking equipment, and this has been sent to China. Well, this is a global crisis. crisis, and it requires a global response. So helping others is also a way of helping ourselves. But I can reassure Canadians that, first, we have been able to meet the needs of the provinces with respect to protective equipment, and in the coming days we will be receiving millions of additional items in medical equipment in order to meet all the needs that are out there. And Canadian companies are also manufacturing medical equipment at this time, so therefore we will have the necessary equipment to keep Canadians safe, while at the same time doing our part internationally, because this is a global crisis.
We recognized from the very beginning that this is a global crisis that requires global cooperation and response if we are to keep all of us safe and if we are to keep Canadians safe. At the same time, I can assure everyone that the federal stockpiles have been sufficient to meet the needs of the provinces until this point. And in the coming days, we will be receiving millions more items that are necessary right across the country, at the same time as our businesses, companies, and manufacturers are tooling up production to make sure that we have enough, not just for Canadians, but for friends and allies around the world who need it.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, Hélène Buzetti, du Devoir. À vous la parole.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to come back to your legislation giving taxation and spending powers until December 2021. You explained why your government thought that it needed that kind of flexibility to deal with the crisis, but you never explained why you thought you needed it for such a long time. Could you please explain the logic of 2021, and do you regret it? As you know, this is an unexpected and unpredictable situation, and this is something we've never seen happen in Canada or in the global economy. We know that we need extraordinary measures in order to respond to this crisis. We wanted to give the government the necessary flexibility to be able to respond to the crisis, because we don't know how long it could last. And we understood and worked with the opposition parties in order to resolve their concerns, and we will continue to ensure that the necessary measures are there for Canadians.
Merci. Prochaine question.
Merci. Thank you. The next question is from David Ingram from Reuters, Ottawa. Please go ahead.
Yes. Good morning, Prime Minister. President Trump yesterday said he wanted...
Sorry, David. I need you guys to raise the volume. I can't hear them.
Okay, sorry. Is that better?
Yes, that's better. Thank you, David.
All right. President Trump said yesterday that he wanted to reopen the U.S. economy by Easter. Mayors of border towns in Canada are telling us they are petrified by the idea of a whole bunch of Americans coming north, possibly with the virus. How concerned are you by his comments, and what are you going to do to stop this? Is there any way you can kind of put some sort of security presence on the border?
We will continue to work with the United States to ensure that the border measures we put in place are respected. We have closed the border temporarily to all but essential travelers, and we will continue to work with the American administration to ensure that we're doing everything we can to keep our country safe and to keep Canadians safe in our case. We will continue to adjust as things unfold as necessary. But we will be continuing to follow the best advice of the scientific community on doing what is necessary to keep Canadians safe as a priority.
Merci beaucoup. Dernière question au téléphone.
Thank you. Merci. The last question is from Bruce Campton-Smith from the Toronto Star. Please go ahead.
Prime Minister, good morning. Just wondering, why was the quarantine for travelers arriving from outside the country not made mandatory sooner? Before the March break, travelers came home, before the border was closed to all foreign travel. And are you worried that this delay may have contributed to the spread of the virus in Canada?
Right across the country, we've seen Canadians following the guidelines, taking very seriously the recommendations of public health agencies. We have seen people staying at home. We have seen people keeping 2 meters distant from each other. We've seen people engaged in hand washing and using hand sanitizer. We know that the vast majority of Canadians have been following the guidelines set out for their own protection and for the protection of all of us. Unfortunately, there are a number of people who have not been following the guidelines that are there for their protection, which is why we've had to take this next step of bringing in the Quarantine Act to ensure that Canadians who do not follow the instructions to self-quarantine for 14 days, self-isolate for 14 days immediately upon re-entering Canada, they will be facing fines and perhaps even jail time.
Merci beaucoup. On va maintenant passer aux journalistes ici.
Hi, Ashley Burke, CBC News. A week and a half ago, you told Canadians to come home. More than 1 million Canadians have since then. Can you tell me about the decision-making and the rationale behind waiting until now to make it mandatory to undergo a 14-day self-quarantine rather than a week and a half ago?
There was a requirement from the very beginning, instructions given to Canadians returning that they needed to self-isolate for 14 days. And many, many, many of them did. Canadians have been following the instructions and the rules and the guidelines set out by public health because they know it's about protecting their own safety, protecting that of their loved ones, and protecting the integrity and the health of people who work in our healthcare system. Unfortunately, there have been too many people who have not, and that's why we have to take this further step of making quarantine mandatory and bringing in enforcement measures as well.
And one of the challenges is enforcement with self-mandatory quarantine. Are you asking people to report if they see someone breaking the rules or the law?
Public health will be following up in many, many cases to ensure that people are following these rules, and enforcement will happen as enforcement does, as in various ways by our police and enforcement officers.
En français, s'il vous plaît.
Okay.
We recognize that many people will follow these recommendations, and Health Canada will be following up with many people to make sure that they are in self-isolation. And if people do not comply with the guidelines, and we have seen a number of cases in the news where people have stopped and have been arrested for not following those recommendations. Radio-Canada, you're asking Canadians to make sacrifices to do their part. Why not ask the large credit card companies to give people a grace period? There are people whose credit card is maxed up, they're paying interest. Don't you think it's time for them to give Canadians a grace period? Yes, that is a conversation we are now having with the major banks in Canada. And I can tell you that Minister Morneau has been in regular discussions with the banks. We are encouraging them to take such measures at this time. At the same time, we're looking at taking measures to allow people to have greater access to credit, credit that would cost much less than what is currently charged on credit cards.
I can assure you that the Finance Minister has had conversations directly with the banks about credit card interest rates. We recognize that they are a significant challenge for many Canadians at this point. That is why we are encouraging them to take action to alleviate the burden for Canadians. At the same time as we are looking on our end at making credit more available and less expensive for Canadians to be able to make it through the next few months.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Janet Silver, Global News. Global News has learned that the Trump administration wants to have U.S. military troops stationed within 30 kilometers of the Canadian-U.S. border to cut back over fears with regards to COVID-19 and illegal border crossings. I want to know if you think this is necessary, and if you or any of your colleagues in your government had any discussions with the Trump administration about this.
Canada and the United States have the longest unmilitarized border in the world, and it is very much in both of our interests for it to remain that way. We have been in discussions with the United States on this.
Canada and the United States have the longest unmilitarized border in the world, and it is in our interests, the interests of both countries, to keep it that way. We are in discussion with the United States on that very issue.
Hi, Prime Minister. Molly Thomas, CTV National News. Can you give us a little bit more clarity on that? I mean, what does it mean to have discussions on this, and what does this mean for Canada?
We have highlighted that the fact that the Canada-U.S. border is the longest unmilitarized border in the world is something that has benefited our two countries and our both economies tremendously, and we feel that it needs to remain that way.
I want to ask about, there's more than 30,000 cases alone in New York. That's a state that borders parts of Ontario and Quebec. Would we ever ban essential goods or people coming in specifically from that hotspot?
I think we will always take measures that are necessary to protect Canadians, as we've demonstrated. At the same time, we understand that part of protecting Canadians is ensuring a good supply of food, of medical supplies, of necessary equipment across our border. We will continue to look for ways to make sure we're keeping Canadians safe while providing us with the things we need.
Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. Prime Minister, on your call with the G20 leaders today, was there any discussion or a decision made on the call from the UN for $2 billion in aid for developing countries to fight the coronavirus, including help with testing kits in Africa and other gear needed?
We talked about a number of things. We talked about the need for a coordinated global response. That is something that the G20 is particularly well suited to move forward on, and we need to make sure that we're continuing to exchange information and align in the actions we take. We talked about the need to flatten the global curve of this pandemic, which means beyond just individual countries doing what's necessary for themselves, we need to work together to have an impact that goes beyond our borders. We talked about the need for global economic support for citizens, for businesses. The G20 represents 85% of the global GDP. We know that we have the capacity to stave off and to positively impact the economy at this time of significant stress. And so we pledged to work together. And we also talked about the need to help vulnerable countries that don't have either the science or the health systems to be able to keep their populations safe, including through investments through global organizations like the UN or the WHO or the World Bank. We also specifically talked about the challenges facing Africa and how we will be there to support Africa as they face this pandemic as well.
So does that mean that, the question was, is Canada and other countries actually sending money? And additionally, Saudi Arabia is the chair of the G20. Did the price war over oil prices come up, and what's happening there?
We, as I spoke about yesterday, we will be participating in international efforts to fight this virus. We know that support for vulnerable countries who are struggling with the ability to combat this virus is not just about being altruistic, it's about protecting Canadians as well. This virus will possibly face resurgences even once we've handled it in Canada and in many countries. Our ability to minimize those resurgences will be linked to our ability to help and work with countries in more dire situations.
We recognize that participating in global aid to combat COVID-19 is not just a question of altruism. It's a question of doing the right thing for Canadians. We know that preventing any resurgence of the virus in several months, once we've controlled it in Canada, will require concrete action in vulnerable countries right now. And that's why we want to participate in the UN's efforts to help those countries in distress.
Merci tout le monde.
Bonne journée.